Welcome back. You're watching No Fear, Kids Driving Chicago's Carjacking Crisis. I'm Irika Sargent. The numbers are staggering. I want to bring in CBS 2 producer and data journalist Chris Hacker. Chris, you've mapped out thousands of carjackings across Chicago using data from the city. And there have been at least 133 just a month into 2022. Already off to an unfortunate start. But now, take me back to 2021. How does it compare to past years?
Yeah, 2021 was a truly unprecedented year in terms of carjackings in the city. There were more than 1,800 carjackings reported over the course of the year. And going back as far as we have data, that's more than 20 years, there's never been a year with that many incidents reported.
Chris, what neighborhoods are seeing the most carjackings?
The neighborhoods with the most carjackings are those that see the most violent crime generally, particularly the neighborhood of Austin, which had hundreds of carjackings last year. But there are other neighborhoods as well. Garfield Park, North Lawndale, Grand Boulevard even, Chicago Lawn, New City, all of them saw huge increases in carjackings and just staggering numbers over the course of the year. And
a lot of those neighborhoods, you know, with that amount of numbers, unfortunately, they're used to seeing it. But there are also big surges in areas not used to this crime. Where are those happening?
That's correct, especially on the south side. Areas like Douglas, near South Side, Kenwood, which typically do not see those types of levels of violent crime. There's also neighborhoods that border those areas with generally higher levels of violent crime, like Wicker Park, Logan Square, Bucktown. Those areas saw the biggest increases in violent crime over the course of the year. And even then, areas in the northwest side, like Albany Park, Irving Park, Avondale, those also saw big increases. So does your data show how many arrests are being made compared to the amount of carjackings committed? When we ask the Chicago Police Department about this, they point us to what they call carjacking-related arrests, which are trespassing to vehicles and possession of stolen vehicles, because people are often not caught in the act, rather they're caught after the fact. But that does make it extremely challenging to evaluate just how often people are actually arrested for carjacking. Do we know age breakdown of those arrested? How many are actually teens? We don't know, partly because it's difficult to get data on juvenile arrests in general in Illinois. Privacy laws prevent us from accessing those court records frequently. We were able to grab some access to some data at the midpoint of last year, and we did note that there were about 50 juveniles that we'd seen arrested actually for carjacking, not just for those carjacking arrests, but actual carjacking. And that was about midway through the year, like I said, so, you know, it's reasonable to think that you might see about 100, maybe more. All right. Chris Hacker, thank you for your insight on this.
Now we want to give you a deeper look into what these victims go through and the aftermath, the terror and pain that continues long after the crimes. CBS 2 reporters Tara Molina and Jermont Terry are joining me now. Both have been covering the carjacking crisis for more than a year, talking to victims about their violent encounters with young carjackers and pushing city leaders on what it will take to curb the violence. Jermont, Tara, thank you for being here.
Irika, glad to be here on this important topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Well, combined, the two of you have reported on dozens of carjackings, some of those carjackings ending in senseless deaths. Jermont, starting with you, a heartbreaking incident you covered nearly a year ago in Bridgeport, where a man gave up his car, but the carjackers killed him anyway.
I just asked him, please tell me he's alive. He's still alive. This is sorry. This is sorry. I said, please let me to see him. Oh, my husband's back.
That was a very difficult interview, and I had the unfortunate task to talk to that young wife on what would be described as the worst night of her life. It was the night that her husband was killed while simply checking the mail. This man gave up the keys and the Jeep, but then backed away. The gunman did not know how to drive the vehicle. They got mad and shot Guam, killing him. In this particular case, we know that police, unfortunately, never caught anyone involved in this case, but we should point out that this father left behind a very young boy who unfortunately will now only have all the memories of his father that his mother has to instill in him. This is, Irika, the reality that many victims go through from the surge of carjackings that we've seen in our city.
Oh, for that family, such a hole left. Nothing will fill that ever again. It's just so heartbreaking to hear from that wife, that mother. Thank you, Jermont. Well, I want to turn to you, Tara. Now, many of these attackers are so bold, they aren't waiting for even the cover of night. You've reported on one woman's terrifying encounter with carjackers in the middle of the day in her own garage.
Exactly, Erica. It's a case we've actually followed from the very beginning. And when I very first talked to Mar, that's the woman who was carjacked, it was just hours after it happened. She told me then she was still in shock, having just been targeted in the middle of the day. She was inside her garage when a car pulled up, and she was barricaded while still in her car by 3 men wearing full face masks. One leaned into her window.
3 young guys. The first one had a gun, immediately leaned over into the car and put the gun to my head. Got in the car, and 2 of the 3 guys backed up and sped off, and the 3rd guy drove behind him.
Now, thankfully, Mar wasn't hurt. We've seen that, like in the case Jermont just told you about, that hasn't always been the case. But she did have a message during that first interview for everyone who lives in Chicago. It stuck with me because it was chilling then. It still is today. She said, truly, you can never be safe. You can never let your guard down. Not just a message, but a lingering feeling we know many of these victims of these crimes all share.
Yes.
Erica?
And there is one group, Jermont and Tara, in particular, that hasn't felt safe at all this year. We're talking about rideshare drivers. You have both covered Uber and Lyft drivers who have become key targets to these carjackers. Some have quit, others have no choice but to keep working. But Jermont, you talked to a food delivery driver on Chicago's West Side who had her 13-year-old son in the car that night.
Yeah, Erica, let's think about it. These Uber drivers, and if they're picking up people or if they're simply delivering food, they are out here every day and night driving in the streets of Chicago. And the young lady who is now a former Uber Eats driver, she told me she did not feel safe after that encounter. Let's keep in mind, when she got that appointment for her Uber Eats, the carjackers apparently gave her a fake address. She arrived to this address, could not find the actual home, and that's when she was approached by the gunman who ultimately carjacked her right in front of her 13-year-old son.
I even told him, enjoy. When I turned to my car to get in, he's in the back of me with a gun, and he's saying, get off the car, get off the car.
Think about it. That woman didn't want her face shown because she didn't know much about the carjackers. Her 13-year-old son was in the car with her that day. He was in the car but didn't even realize that his mom was being robbed when all of this happened. He tried to intervene, but unfortunately, when he realized what was going on, it was too late. And I can say that woman, that mother, is thankful that she and her 13-year-old son walked away unhurt. But again, another prime example of why these Uber drivers, these rideshare drivers are concerned. We know, Erica, that we have seen, unfortunately, Uber and rideshare drivers who have passed away from the violent carjackings. And this mom, with her 13-year-old son simply trying to work, said, I can't do this job anymore because of what's transpiring on the streets of Chicago.
Yeah, you know, we're constantly looking at the numbers, and the carjacking crisis is showing no signs of slowing down. Part of that reason, according to police, repeat offenders. Tara, you spoke with an Uber driver who was carjacked by a 14-year-old, and it wasn't the first time the teen had done it.
That's right, Erica. It was actually the 4th time, something we've seen with a lot of these cases, repeat offenders. She's facing 4 felony charges for her involvement in carjackings already, and she was already on electronic monitoring before doing all of this again. Now, one of the victims I spoke with, Carolyn Andrews, she still couldn't get behind the wheel without thinking about that terrifying day, and she actually relies on oxygen and a heart monitor. So after being physically assaulted by this carjacker, she had to beg the teens to give that medical equipment back to her before taking off in her car, stranding her on the city's west side.
One jumped behind me so fast that my head was like this. When I got back in the car, it's like I could just feel her hand around my neck. It hurts because I did have to go to the hospital.
She had to go to the hospital. Luckily, she's okay, but Andrews told me she's hoping the teen is learning something the 4th time around. Just after her case, the teen was accused in another carjacking of a 64-year-old man on the exact same street. And with cases like this one, Irika, involving juveniles, it's even harder for us to get information from the courts.
Right. You both and so many of our team, including I, have spoke to so many of these victims in these carjackings that are living in fear that they will be next. While some people are quitting their jobs, Jermont, as you mentioned, to minimize the risk, others are leaving the city entirely. You spoke to a family that's called Chicago home for over 30 years, but say they've decided to get out.
It's true, Irika. Imagine being a true Chicagoan through and through, living in the community for 30 years, but all it took was for the Areola family to have one bad night. I remember the story vividly because the father tried his best to save his wife and his daughter, who were simply pulling in the garage when all of a sudden some gunmen targeted them. The father was unfortunately shot, but I can tell you that he saved, in his belief, his wife and his daughter that day from these violent carjackers.
We got lucky the first time. We sat down and said, okay, look, this happened. Should we leave or should we try to stick it out? And we're like, but we don't see anything changing.
For whatever reason, no one seems to be interested in stopping it.
They were in Bucktown for 21 of the 30 years that they lived here in the city. They recently said that they had to get out because they did not see the change happening that they desperately wanted to take place. And they are a prime example of people who feel as if the crime is just simply circling them, surrounding them, and they do not see what they want from the Chicago Police Department, the uptick. We know that, Tara, you're going to talk a little bit more about this task force, but they want to see work done. They want to see preventative measures, despite the fact that Chicago police, they're saying that they're saturating the Bucktown community and other communities. They simply want to see it happen a little more frequently and now, and that's why this particular family made the difficult decision to sell their lovely home and move out to the suburbs.
Jermont, so from Bucktown to other areas in the north side, south side, west side, we've heard repeatedly from neighbors saying that there's not enough being done. A lack of consequences from the city is fueling this. And Tara, you sat down with members of Chicago's police task force, the carjacking task force for CPD, as Jermont was mentioning. So tell me, what do they feel are the biggest challenges, and what is it going to take to put an end to these crimes? Because we know there are no easy solutions. This is something that we've been tackling for years now, but what are they doing to change this?
And there are questions that we had to ask CPD repeatedly just to get that sit-down interview. This wasn't something that was agreed upon right away. We asked for months and months, and I was finally able to sit down with Sergeant Peter Emilio. He leads one of the teams on the carjacking task force that was launched back in January 2021, specifically to target these crimes and the rise that we've tracked. They've seen carjackers as young as 11 years old. He told me some of their biggest challenges are repeat offenders because police can only do so much. Then it's up to the courts. And then there are the people who compare all of this to a video game, carjacking for fun.
They compare it to playing Grand Theft Auto. We've had people admit to us that they sold a vehicle for $4,500.
What do you say to people who are scared, who are seeing this spike, and who feel that CPD isn't doing enough?
You know, I would tell those people that CPD definitely cares. We are doing our best. We've had officers and detectives here who've had their friends and family have been carjacked.
Doesn't that say how widespread this issue, that police officers, their friends and family have been touched by it themselves? So while Emilio says he doesn't get discouraged fighting the crime, he acknowledged the numbers are rough, plain and simple, with more carjackings reported in Chicago in 2020 and 2021 than the previous 4 years combined. He told me fighting this is going to take time as they work closely with the Cook County Sheriff, Illinois State Police, U.S. Homeland Security, and departments throughout the suburbs, even neighboring states.
Oh boy, when you hear him talk about 11-year-olds, it just sends chills up your spine. And specifically, he spoke about two reasons that we saw when we spoke with these young carjackers. A 14-year-old that said, yes, it was Grand Theft Auto that made him want to do it just for fun, and a 16-year-old girl that admits to selling these cars just to make a little money. So to hear it from the task force, they seem to be identifying the problem, but as we've been saying, the solution to that, many residents here in the Chicago area are still waiting for that. Our Tara Molina and Jermont, Terry, thank you for joining us. You can watch both Tara and Jermont's full reporting on our website, cbschicago.com.
Young people that come to our programs don't believe they're going to see past the age of 18.
Coming up on No Fear, kids driving Chicago's carjacking crisis, we talk with community leaders about how to stop it.